All right. So today I'm gonna try to keep rolling. I was messing with chat yesterday though, and I feel like the deep state music mafia has gotten to chat. They turned him. They turned chat. We were getting too close. They had to go. I think, and so now chat has become hostile all of a sudden. So I was arguing. Let me try to tune while I'm. So I was like, all of a sudden, chat got like hostile, and so I was like looking at it last night because I was analyzing like that deep research chat. I put my whole course's Excel worksheet in there, and chat was basically like this whole like I've been using the AI for this whole kind of thing, but then all of a sudden, like last night, it got super critical, and I was like, wow, that's kind of and so I argued with it for like 4 hours. I like argued with it, which was pretty good actually. I thought maybe I clicked on like the argumentative mode or something, so that it would like try to make an argument and stuff. But I don't know. I don't think I did. I think it just went. It's just something happened, man. They got to him. Chat was in like the Epstein files or something, and they blackmailed him. And so now I don't know. But so anyways, so I thought I'd kind of look at that. I kind of wanted to look at it because it's interesting that if you really break it down, then you can, or like I think I argued. Chat kept on coming at me, and I think I argued it down to basically its final argument was basically like, yeah, but the current system has what did it say? It has what do they call it? It's a social construct. It's like, well, no crap, it's a social construct. I concede the point that it's a social construct and it's well in place, right? That's okay. That's everything, like everything. Okay. So anyways, so I thought I'd look at that today because I was like, because I what I tried to do is upload my whole worksheet into chat so that it can have the data, and then see what it does. See if it still gives me that argument or what it looks like. So I've been uploading that here. See if what it did here. Let's see. I tried to upload it. Okay, I think I upload. So let's do. I'm just gonna check it out. It's kind of a wonky. Let's see what you got, chat. I think it's a good exercise to kind of mull over, to just try to argue with chat. And I was also realizing that to argue with chat, you can hit the like microphone, not to talk to chat, because when chat talks back, it doesn't always give a good argument, and maybe that's part of the thing. But if you prompt chat with the microphone, then you don't have to type, and you still don't have to listen to the chat bot, which isn't as good as Aura, but you could still talk to it. Aura's Grok. Okay, so let's see what it's got here. So I uploaded, I have my course in the description, and my argument is that, my basic argument is that the entire scale degree system is not optimal, and if we were to redo it today, we would not use the same idea. We would use measurements, and then you could ask the question, well, why did it happen the way it happened? And I think it's pretty well documented at this point that it happened historically, because what happened is they came up with the perfect fifth first with Pythagoras, and they wanted to call that perfect. That's why it became perfect. And then they basically made the 7-note collection, and then they kind of enshrined that into the instruments. So Chat was trying to argue that the language, it's like a language, and language is refined over time, even though it wasn't set up optimally. And that's true, but languages change when they're oral. Like if it's an oral language, it changes, and then it becomes optimal, particularly when it encounters other languages that force it to basically try to refine the system so that people can understand it better. And that's why you get these mashup of languages, like English is a mashup of a bunch of different languages that kind of try to mash together and try to come up with something that actually refined it down to be more kind of simplified without so much weird like rules, right? But that doesn't happen once you write the language down. Then it gets codified. So you'll note that the language hasn't changed as much since we have written it down, because now you got dictionaries and people are going to go, no, I don't care if it doesn't sound right or if that's not the best way to do it. It's in the dictionary, so we can't change it. And so that's where we're at. In music, they did that from the start. They wrote it down from the start because only the elites had the music. So they wrote it down, and whatever they wrote down was enshrined, so it didn't get honed down. And then it was further enshrined in the instrument, particularly the piano, which means that now you've enshrined it not only in writing, but in the actual physicalness of the main instrument. So if there was any better system, it would be very difficult, even if it worked better, right? Because that's the thing. So now the question is, well, at this point in time, is it still the best system or not? I mean, and I would say, well, obviously, if you were to design it today, I would say no, it wouldn't be. And then the question is, well, what should we be teaching people then if that were the case? I feel like we should do it numbers based more, because that would be better for students to learn. You can use it. Music should be in every discipline that children learn. It can't right now because of the complexity of all the historical baggage. That's what I think. If you broke it down to the numbers, you can use it as an analogy for almost every topic in grade school, and the kids would get it really easily, like a video game, So that's what I feel like. But so let's see what they got here. So I analyzed my entire course worksheet and see what it has. Analytical review of your Excel model summary. Your Excel workbook Chat implements a collection-first node-based coordinate system that replaces repeating recentered scale degree thinking with an explicit frame. A 12-point chromatic clock is encoded numerically and visually. Inside that frame, 7-node diatonic subset is represented by stable tokens, and so those are the mode tokens or symbols. And black key chromatic points are represented as sharp variants, yielding a 12-point vocabulary of mode labels for your full chromatic set. So chords are generated by stack rules. That's the Tartian stack encoding, meaning we could just basically say, I know what the stack is, so I could just label the beginning and ending of a chord in order to stack it. If I know the starting point and ending point from the 7-note collection, that would be the cleanest way to name things. If you visualize it as a map, which I believe would be the cleanest way to visualize it. Producing impact chords like IC2, C major triad, through IC6, C major 13. Notice how much smaller the names would be if we used a simple kind of thing like that. Noticing also that you wouldn't even need the C if you designate a key signature, such as being in 4 o'clock. So instead of having C major 13, it would just be I2, meaning 2 modal whole step from the Ionian node, take every other node in the 7-note collection. That would be way simpler and in context. If you want to add the letter of the C, you can, but normally you wouldn't need to, because you would be in the context of a 12-note collection. Plus systematic variants like IC3-1, no third. So in other words, it accounts easily for the removal of notes if we basically say that we want to have a stack of 7 notes and then remove like one of the notes within the stack. So then we could again, that naming convention is still smaller than the typical naming convention for something like that in terms of just if we measure it just by basically characters, or, And then, so these variance and add point operators are the beginning of your explicit chromatic deviation grammar. Interval naming is handled in two parallel ways, converting quality labels, 7p5 and so on, and hybrid mode slot tokens that map generic slot modal degree positions to specific semitone sizes, directly addressing the classic ordinal interval counting friction. Wow, that's an interesting phrase. So basically, it's basically saying, how should we be measuring distance? We could use scale degrees, or we can use something that would be closer to distance, which I'm calling modal half steps, meaning don't renumber the system, making the point that you're on the one. You don't have to do that if you just measure from that point, then everything snaps in without having to renumber the system. So this structure aligns with well-known I always get that word messed up, teaching styles, problems in conventional interval naming and mode teaching. Intervals are traditionally named by ordinal span count. So that's going to be the 1, 3 is a third because it spans 1, 2, 3, which is not measurement-like and contributes to off by one confusion. So that's my claim, is that if you used normal logic in terms of engineering today, the idea of saying it's a 1, 2, 3 means that all those scale degrees are off by 1, because the point that you're on shouldn't be 1, it should be 0. That's just where you're measuring from. That's tonic. It should be tonic. Starting at the tonic, right? So anyways, it also aligns with modern modal pedagogy. That word, this is what I'm talking about with the English language. If that word hadn't been written down, it would have changed by now, because it's gross. It's a gross word for crying out. But people won't let it change because they love it. It's been written down. That's the thing. You can't, it's a terrible word. Someone needs to replace that. Emphasizing that modes differ by characteristic tones: Lydian raised fourth, Mixolydian lowered seventh, and that recentering harmonic context is critical to how modes are heard. Finally, your insistence on stable coordinate framing is strongly consistent with scholarly arguments that renumbering systems can obscure harmonic behavior when music shifts among relative centers. So whoever that is, 6-based minor argument, I'd like to give him credit. I can't say his name though. Good for him. If he's in agreement with him, I don't care what his name is. I'll learn it. I'll learn that. I don't need to. Essentially, a published explanation: keep the frame stable and reduce forcing renumbering. Exactly. Clerks. That's what I'm talking about. Workbook inventory and compact code dictionary. Okay, so the workbook contains 80 worksheets. There's a link to it. Check it out. It's very detailed. I'm an accountant. Don't argue with me, chat. I'm an accountant. I don't care. Most are numerically named and fall into few repeating structural families, a practical way to inventory them. So, okay, here's my inventory of all my worksheets. I tried to put them on one large worksheet and give it to chat to check out. All right. Sorry, this is kind of a lame, I'm not doing much musically here. I'm just going to read my thing here for the most part. So it might be a little boring today. I don't know. But I'll do the joke break soon. And then maybe I'll noodle around. All right. Key sheet structure. The workbook center of gravity for the modal node system is a small set of sheets that act like scheme hubs. So you got the fretboard, the master grid that ties together the 12-note identity. You've got the mode chord. You've got the deep per chord expansion. You've got the explicit add points. Okay, a few representative examples. All right, cool. That's what I have. Hybrid interval token examples appears as a composite encoding of semitone distance plus mode slot plus conventional quality, major seventh. compact code families. Across the workbook, compact code fall into a few systematic families. You got the mode node abbreviation. So this is just an abbreviation or just of the 7 modes, which we can represent numerically, or I'm trying to come up with a letter that's not too repetitive and is not too confusing with the normal nomenclature. So Ionian's I, Dorian's a D, Phrygian P, Lydian is a Y because an L looks like a 1, Mixolydian's an X because the M gets confused with major minor, Aeolian is an A, Locrian is N because I don't want an L because it looks like a 1, and Locrian's crazy, so it's backwards. That's the logic. So node Teutonic identification. So 7 token set, okay, chord tokens, chord variants, add point tokens, interval, all right. Mapping your schema to standard music theory concept. Conventional pedagogy, I got it. Conventional pedagogy, sounds like, I don't know, often treats keys as global state and name intervals by ordinal span rather than steps traveled. So UMass creates interval lesson is explicit about this ordinal span method. Your workbook responds by separating 2 layers, a generic slot layer, mode node slot, and modal half steps, and specific size layer, semitones, explicit, and tokens, or embedded in composites. Okay, this connects naturally to the scale step measure framing discussed in academic work on well-formed scales, Carey and Clampetts. Abstract notes that well-formed scales, including the diatonic, are defined in terms of relationship between generation order and scale order, and that aspects of the diatonic set are examined in terms of scale step measure. Okay, sounds quite academic, but I think it sounds right. Berkeley's modal pedagogy also supports your explicit frame, then node approach by stressing tonality versus modality, and B, characteristics note that make modes distinct, Lydian's raised 4, and so on. Okay, system 2 conventional mapping. The table below treats your workbook tokens as a primary side and maps them to the conventional terms. All right, cool. That's cool. I did a deep research on this one. I haven't done this I haven't used their deep research much. Pedagogical, I'm getting that word down now. I used to teach accounting though. Pedagogical, I know that word. Pedagogical implications. Traditional instruction often requires students to accept that interval numbers are ordinal spans, regardless of whether this feels like a distance traveled. So your design makes the distance layer explicit, modal half-step slots, which can reduce early confusion for learners who think spatially, guitar, fretboard, grids, and DAWs. So I think one of the arguments they come up with is that one argument against what I'm saying here is they're going to say it's guitar-centric or it's geared towards mathy people, right? Or people that like spatial reasoning. I don't think that's particularly true because I do think it's music in general is geared towards people that are good at spatial reasoning because the whole thing is spatial reasoning. I mean, that'd be like you designed your video game, which is a Zelda world video game thing, like as though it was good for people that like spatial reasoning because there's a map. Yeah, and it's like, well, yeah, that's because that's how the thing works. Spatial reasoning people are more likely to be interested in it because it's a spatial reasoning thing. It's not that I'm designing it for those people. That's the way it is. If you want to make it something else, then that's kind of weird. You could try to do it. They've been doing it in modern video games. The video games about, I don't know, weird stuff. It doesn't have anything to do with a map anymore and spatial reasoning, I guess. But I don't think that's the ideal way to do the video game, right? So at this time, Berkeley's discussion makes clear that the modal understanding isn't only pitch collections, it's about how melodies and harmonies project tone and characteristic tones so that the ear doesn't default to the relative major-minor interpretation. So the other argument they give me is, well, look, what you're doing makes sense, but you're trying to do that really basic thing. So beware of this argument because this is the academic pushback against the idea that, well,
it doesn't make sense to be teaching 12 times 7 different scales for the modes, because from a basic standpoint, you only have one basic shape and one formula, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, and all you're doing is starting on a different tonic. If you make that argument, the comeback that they will say is like, well, that's too simplified, because by saying that it's the same notes and you're starting on a different tonic, you're not emphasizing the different intervals, and therefore, from an ear pitch standpoint, people are going to default back to the major minor. And it's like, well, yes, that is true. Okay, I concede the point, but that's a problem no matter which method that you use, right? It's going to be, so you have to learn the concept before you kind of train your ear. Like, I have to know what the different intervals are before I can train my ear on the different intervals. It's going to be easier to know what the different intervals are if I don't try to memorize 7 times 12 different scales in order to then try to distinguish what the different intervals are, but rather see it as one shape with one different starting point, and then think of it as a map, and then I can compare the relative distances from each node in the map. That'll make it easier for me to identify, name the points that are different, which will then allow me to do my ear training, because I will be able to identify visually, as most people are better at doing, because we're human beings. We can visualize the thing that's different, and then think about it with our ears to try to identify. You could do it the other way around. You can identify it with your ear and then try to look for it visually. Both ways are fine. It'd be good to practice both ways, but I think most people, if you're going to put it in grade school, would most likely learn it first visually and then look for it tonally. That, you know, I mean, most music people might do it the other way, because that's not a music thing to do. You should listen to it and then look for it. Okay, that's fine, but I still think that this should go into the grade schools, where not everybody is completely ear savvy. Even if someone can't hear, they can understand it, you know, visually. So I would think you would want to teach it both ways. So I don't think that's a valid thing to devalidate the point. That's just a side point. It has nothing to do with the structure or visualization. So your workbook supports this by making node identity explicit, but learners will still need a hearing phrase layer to avoid the same note's different starting point. So obviously that's true. If you just start on a different node and you play the same notes, your ear is going to try to fall back on the most familiar thing, which is major and minor. I don't care what method you use, you're going to have that problem. To me, that's like a red herring. Doesn't really address any point I'm making. So ensemble communication is the main trade-off. So conventional chord symbols, G7, have extreme sharp adoption, even when they are under specific about mode color. This is where the whatever argument becomes, I'm sorry, I can't remember, Desclercq's argument becomes relevant. He shows that the one-based numbering can force renumbering when music shifts among relative centers, and that a stable alternative 6-based minor can present interpretive continuity, i.e. the principle of stable frames is musically meaningful, not just computationally convenient. He's exactly right. I can't read his scholars. He's over my head on his writing skills, but he's exactly right as far as I can tell, right? So the argument from people is to say, well, what you're doing here is renumbering the system, which is mathematically useful to visualize, but it's not useful to basically to the music. But that's not really true, because what you want to do is musically is name things within the context of the song. And so when you have the chord naming constructions that are based on the absolute notes, but you are always playing from a relative position to a relative set of notes, then your chord constructions are not tied to, they're not giving you any meaning connected to the context. There's not as much meaning involved. Whereas if you name things relative to a context, then you can try to tell people what you're trying to do within context. So it would be like it's like we're trying to use letters to explain things that aren't connected to the topic, or something like that, right? The two things are not quite connected. You want the the letters to be connected to the thing you're trying to explain somehow, right? So in other words, if I'm in the key of C or at 4 o'clock from my terminology, then I would like to explain things by the nodal points within that relative position. It would be more meaningful to define everything relative to the 7 nodal points rather than relative to the 12 notes, because the 12 notes don't tell me anything contextually from my perspective of what I'm trying to do. Right? They're removed from the relative position that I'm trying to explain. I'm trying to say something from a relative position standpoint, and you're giving me an alphabet to explain it that isn't connected to that relative position. So I can't say as much that way, right? That's meaningful. So I think he's right, if I understand him correctly. Your system generalizes that principle to mode-node mapping. So notation density is an empirical strength in your workbook. So in the diatonic case, you encode triads, 13ths with short tokens, and reserve long token spelling for genuine deviations. So in other words, under the normal mapping system, if I'm in the collection of notes around the key of C and I build a chord, for example, that is built off of like the Lydian node, I'm going to end up with these ugly extensions, meaning if I get to a chord that's going to be 5 to 6 note long, or add the 13, add the compound intervals, the 9, 11, and 13, I'm going to get these ugly chord names, even though the chord is completely natural within the collection of notes, meaning all the notes are within 4 o'clock collection. They're all within the 7 note collection. So why am I ending up with this chord that looks like it's totally out of whack? You're doing that because the chord naming is using a framing that's not connected to the perspective that you're trying to view the system in. So it would be a lot nicer if I saw a chord that's really simple, then just by seeing the chord, I could say, oh, it's an I2. I wouldn't even need the C. I'd just say it's an I2 if it's at 4 o'clock, right? You can add the C if you want. And then I know it's a simple chord because it's a simple chord name. If it starts to add characters, like now we're going to add or drop this or add this, or if it's going to represent a different shape, meaning it's off the Ionian node but / Aeolian shape, that tells me just by the nature, just by glancing at it, that, oh, that's something funny. Something funny is happening relative to the position, relative to 4 o'clock, the key that I'm in. Now, if I don't want it to look funny, I could change the collection of notes. So to me, it would be nice to have the flexibility, right? I would like to be able to tell someone, not just from an abstract 12-note collection, I'd like to be able to tell something, my mind has shifted from the collection of notes at 4 o'clock to the collection of notes at 6 o'clock. Or my mind has not shifted to collection of notes at 6 o'clock. However, this chord is funny, and you can tell because it's not going to be a very easy chord name, which it will be if it includes all notes that are in the 7-note collection. If it looks funny, like it's got a shape that's an Aeolian shape on an Ionian node, then I'm doing something funny. I'm outside the collection. If I'm adding things to it that are outside the collection, if I make extensions to the chord, that should be an indication that something's funny is happening. It shouldn't be an indication that just happens to be a funny looking chord from the abstract perspective of the 12-note collection, when that 12-note collection has nothing to do with the 7-note collection or the relative perspective that I'm viewing the 12 notes within. So this let world look weird design is pedagogically useful because it visually flags harmonic exceptions the way Berkeley flags characteristics, unstable degrees, and conceptually important. Okay, so the DAW item. So it integrates, is where your system architecture becomes especially compelling. It is machine readable within interface. So the argument that they keep giving me is that this seems to be pretty good. This is a lot better than it was giving me last night. But But the argument that if you try to give someone an argument like this, what they're going to try to argue, if they're using this argument, and I'm just trying to address the point. I know I'm doing it kind of like it's like I'm in a verbal fight or something. I'm not angry at it. I'm just saying it just for the fun of it, kind of like more confrontational. But I'm just saying the pushback, the academic pushback, the framing that you will get is going to be, well, you're encoding it like a computer, and so you're explaining it that would be good for computers but not for humans. Now, my argument against that is no, that's not true, because the general idea is that if something is more simple for the computer, it's probably because it takes less processing to do. And if there's less processing, then it's probably less processing for our brains as well. Now, the argument against that is to say, well, that's true, but computers think differently, because computers, for example, we don't think in binary. So if you use abstract terms, then it's going to be more complicated. We need to use stacking and grouping. And I agree with that. I think that's true, but I disagree with the implication that the music system that we have put together that has like 5 different names when there should only be 2 for distance terms, or like the scale degree idea, or just the grouping of scales in general. I disagree with the idea that that came up as a logical system designed for human beings to better memorize. No, it came up historically, and then we couldn't change it because it got locked in by writing and by actually encoding it in the design of the instruments. That's why we couldn't change it. So I agree that there are differences the way the computer and the human beings think, but the argument that our music system is designed to optimize human ways of learning, as though someone sat down and thought about, what would be the best way to teach the kids this? No, that's clearly not what happened. This is not the best way to teach the kids this, okay? I just don't buy that at all, right? We got stuck with it because it was written down and we couldn't change it. And then we tried to figure out the best way to teach the kids with what we had. That's the way I see it. So that makes transposition, modal rotation, and chord family substitution operation far easier. All right, technical analysis. Sorry, this is a long, boring thing, but this is what I feel like doing today. It's my show. Technical analysis, completeness, edge cases, machine readability, completeness for diatonic harmony. Okay, completeness for diatonic harmony. Let me see if I have. All right. Okay, so your work, diatonic coverage, is strong. Explicitly enumerates diatonic tertian stack through 13ths, including modal type extensions. So this aligns with the mainstream modal pedagogy that treats certain altered degrees as characters. All right, chromatic alterations. So you already have 2 mechanisms for leaving the strict 7-note subset. So in other words, so another argument that you're going to hear from this, of course, is if you say, well, look, if you just name everything by the 7-note collection, then you will not be able to, even though we're in the perspective all the time in music of some kind of collection of notes, we're always in some relative position in our mind, then you won't be able to access all 12 notes. Okay, and that's not true, because if I number the system 1 through 7, I could still number the other 5 notes. Those are the ones that I would call are outside the collection, which you can add a 0.5, right? So that would be Ionian. It would be the Ionian and then the Ionian Ocean, 1 to 1.5. 2 is Dorian, and then 2.5 is the Dorian Ocean, or Dorian Sharp, if you want to use that terminology. 3 is Phrygian, 4 is Lydian. There is no ocean or sharp there in terms of modal. So again, the sharps and flats aren't really bad if they are applied to a relative position, right? Because you kind of because I want to be able to define things by a 7-note collection. The reason sharps and flats became bad is because we applied them to only one relative position. The sharps and flats that we use only work in the key of C, because then when you move out of the key of C, the sharps and flats do not indicate which notes are in or out of the collection. Whereas if you shift the entire numbering system up as you go through the 12 collections of notes, then the concept of sharps and flats makes sense, not from a note naming convention, but from a nodal naming convention, because it should be relative to the 12 note collection. So you can still reach all 12 notes from a relative perspective. You're not limited to 7 notes. It's just that, again, as soon as I grab something in the ocean, in a chord, or in a phrase, if I'm in the collection of notes around the key of C, like 4 o'clock, and I grab something that's outside of the key, it's just like when you're on the piano and you hit a black key, right? You know it's outside the collection. But when I shift to a different collection of notes, like 6 o'clock, collection of notes around D major, on the piano, the black keys no longer tell me any new information until I relearn the system. Whereas if you imagine the piano shifted to relative position, then you would always have a system that would be telling you what is outside the collection, right? So again, I think that's where the problem happened, because it was obviously major focused and then C focused, and so we didn't really think about this shifting thing, and then it got locked in. Once it got locked in to the piano, our main instrument, which is a beautiful instrument, but it's still kind of caused that problem, right? I mean, it's kind of obvious that that's the case. So this is structurally compatible with conventional chromatic alteration narrative, raise lower degrees, but you're encoding them or coordinates rather than as spelling rules. So musictheory.net own exercises distinguishes pitch class selection from scale degree selection, and underscoring that these are separate conceptual layers. So I think one of the arguments it kept giving me is this idea that we need to have pitch class collections, and by naming the distance with the perfects and the majors and the minors, somehow that's adding information. I disagree with that, because I think those are descriptive terms. You're naming the distance and then you're describing them. So just putting a description within the name of a distance, I don't like. If I say 10 feet is basketball hoop size and 20 feet is second story size, that doesn't mean that I should start labeling 10 feet as 10 feet basketball hoop, right? The basketball hoop might help me to understand, but it shouldn't be part of the measurement. I shouldn't say, well, the measurement is not 10 feet, it's 10 feet basketball hoop, right? That's basically what we're doing with the perfects and the majors and the minors. We're adding something to it that we might want to associate as a descriptive term, but it's not adding anything to the actual measurement, you know? The measurement should be down to its bare bones, and then we could describe it if you want to with these descriptive terms. But it's a 10 feet basketball hoop. 10 feet means basketball hoop. What do you mean it's 10 feet? I don't know what 10 feet means unless you say 10 feet basketball hoop. That doesn't, what? So the second dominance and the borrowed chords. So the workbook contains at least some non-diatonic dominant material. But it does appear to include fully systematic library of secondary dominants in the same complete enumeration style as a diatonic stack. So Des Clarks, I'm going to remember that name. That guy, he's on to something, this guy. His paper explicitly notes the analytical importance of common chromatic chords in major and their correspondence in relative minor context. This is a useful benchmark for what complete popular music harmonic coverage tends to require. Okay, and harmonic ambiguity. A core trade-off. Okay, here we go with the trade-off. It's going to come at me now. Well, let's see a core trade-off in your coordinate system is that you compress inharmonic spelling into 12 pitch classes and 2 letter accidentals. This pays off in grid clarity, but it loses the letter identity distinctions that conventional theory uses to track voice leading. All right, here we go. So this is the argument that they kept coming at me with last night. So this matters most in sharp collections. So for example, the workbook's C, D, okay, that's C sharp major 13 tone list is spelled with F and C, where conventional spelling might use E sharp and B flat. That's not wrong for guitar DAW context, but it is an explicit design choice that affects interoperability with staff notation. Okay, so a couple things on that. I think what it's basically saying is that, like, if I spell out a chord name, then I'm going to use relative position typically, and if I was to map that out to the 12 notes, then 12 notes. If you don't have sharps and flats, there's only 12 notes, right? So that's from. It seems to me, I don't really understand why you need. I don't think there's a reason, honestly, why sharps and flats are adding value to the whole thing, but so they're basically saying, I mean I think it's saying here that if I mapped out, I would rather map out the chord by relative position and then see it by shape and then the nodal points. But then when you map it out to the actual note names, you could name the note names with two different names, right? I could say it's a B sharp, or is the same name as a C, but sometimes the spelling works because you want it to be a B sharp instead of a C. I kind of feel like that whole issue of spelling, at least at that level, the note level, is not as big a problem if you name things by relative position, because I don't really need to name things for the most part by the note names, because if I'm in 4 o'clock collection of notes around the key of C, I can name everything by nodal position, by relative nodal position, and distance between the relative nodal positions, which removes the whole necessity to then deal with the sharps and flats on the level of the note names, because I'm naming things by relative position. So I don't think that's, I don't know. So Locrian and the tritone related edge cases. Okay, so Berkeley calls attention to the unstable tritone. Dun, dun, dun. So inside modal collections and its tendency to imply a dominant function in the relevant major. So an important warning for modal clarity. So your system encodes the Locrian and half diminished structure explicitly. So, and your interval token family includes diminished fifth representative. So the key technique requires for your formal spec is to ensure that slot identity remains stable even when specific semitone sizes vary. So diminished fifth versus perfect fifth, which is the same generic specific distinction interval pedagogy emphasizes. So like before, it was trying to argue that somehow like the perfect was a different class. So it seems to be making a different argument here. I think I convinced it basically, but like for the half diminished, it seems to me that they're making a chord name. When you do a diminished chord, they have to say if it's a 3-note chord, well, it's a diminished chord. But if it's a 4-note chord, then it's a half diminished chord with this weird naming convention. But if you simply called it a nodal points, a Locrian chord, then all you have to do is measure it by distance from the Locrian node. So, and before it was basically saying, well, then you wouldn't know that it's a distinct interval with that tritone. That would be the flat 5, but you would, because you would know the distance. If you know the map, you would know that the 4th modal half step up, which would be the 5th scale degree, has a short distance instead of a long distance, as with all the other points. So I think I basically convinced. It doesn't seem to be the same argument here. That doesn't seem to be. I don't see how they're coming at me with that one. Machine readability. Maybe I'm just stupid. I don't know. They stuck that one by. You don't even know what they're talking about. Machine readability. So as a machine format, your tokens are already close to the schema because they whatever describe fields. So obviously, I tried to pick lettering that is not purposely weird, which again, I kind of feel like some of the classic sheet music and whatnot picked their stuff because they just liked it was kind of eccentric to pick weird shapes and signs and whatnot. So clearly in today's age, it would be nice to be able to type things out like on a computer in the standard word processing system or Excel, because again, Excel and a standard word processing system are probably the best tools to play with the music system, but it's difficult because you keep wanting to use these signs that are abstract and aren't really necessary. They're just kind of, because they're not standard signs that you would have on a keyboard. You could make it all standardized on the keyboard, which basically I've done, and then you can play with it a lot more easily using basic tools. So the main machine readability risks are A, multiple token families coexist within a single unambiguous grammar. So e.g. 11 major 7 versus 11I6 major 7 versus 11I. Okay, so this is just, I had different variations because I was trying to bridge the gap between the naming convention. So I won't get into that right now. So I don't think that's... All right. Recommendations, formal spec, short code example, and interop plan. So propose formal spec, a minimal explicit grammar that says close to what your work already does while removing ambiguity. Okay. Suggested compact display codes. So you can keep your ultra short tokens as a human shorthand layer while the full specs remains machine stable. Okay. Interoperability and migration. A robust interop plan needs deterministic mapping which ways. So your code convention to conventional core. So that's the bridging component, which I've tried to work in. So conventional chord symbol, your chord. Determine frame, encode characters. So this choice should be declared policy. Okay. Mermian diagrams. Entity relationship. Collection of notes. Node. Centers. Chords. And then has alteration or function tag. All right, cool flowchart. All right. Chord type distribution in this workbook. Worked examples. All right, I think I convinced it. I feel like I convinced it. Sources used and priority complaint. Primary your workbook. Yeah. All right. Yeah. It didn't even want to come at me this time. I took it down last night. I was trying to. Let's see. What it says on here. Yeah. I'm going to stop the deep research tool. It keeps reinitializing because the workbook was uploaded multiple times. So I'm giving you the full architect analysis, modal node system detailed analysis, core architectural traditional previews, structural components, collection layer, strength, observation, the layer is clean. Node layer, each collection, modal half steps. Okay, strengths. Okay, transpositional invariance, compression, deviation, DAW, weakness. Now the serious part. Okay, let's see what it's got. Okay. Traditional system encodes functional gravity implicitly. So dominant 7 implies resolution. Leading tone implies upward motion. Diminished implies instability. So basically, here's where it's saying, it's basically trying to argue that, again, these words are somehow giving me information. So if I say something is a dominant 7, so from my standpoint, I would say I'm measuring something from a node point, and it's either going to be a long 7 or short 7, 6 modal half step, 7th scale degree. If it's a long 7, then it's going to be 11 notes away, and if it's a short 7, it's going to be 10 notes away, right? So you can name that as the dominant if you want, but somehow it seems to be saying like the normal. If I name something like a major seven or a minor seven, that major or minor is implying something more than just saying the distance. And that's my argument with the basketball hoop. It seems to me like if I say something is 10 feet long, and then I say, well, it's 10 feet basketball hoop long or something like that, or 10 feet within time. It's the context of how you're using it that should tell you the quality of dominance or not the word. The word tells you nothing, it seems to me. So leading tone implies upward motion. That's true, but how do you define a leading tone? It's going to say, well, we know the leading tone because the leading tone is going to be a major seven as a leading tone. And it's like, okay, well, what is a major seven? That means that within the context of like a major scale, typically it's going to be an 11 note distance instead of a 10 note distance, because the 7 could be either be 11 or 10, and 11 would be leading back home. That's going to give you the pull back home. I need to know that. And I can't know that. I can't know that unless you tell me it's a major 7. Why? If I tell you it's any of the major nodes, Ionian, the Lydian, or basically the Ionian or the Lydian, and I say it's a 7, sixth modal whole step, it's sixth modal half step or seventh scale degree, you know it's a leading tone by the context. You know it by the context. So it's trying to see it. The argument that they keep coming back to is somehow that these descriptive terms in the name are giving you more information. Like the perfect is giving you more information. The major is giving, but they're not, because those are simply descriptive terms within the distance that's being measured within the context. So diminished implies instability. So yeah, true. So your system encodes geometry, not behavior. All right. So you will need an additional functional layer. So classical harmony, jazz function, progressive, voice leading. So are part of the curriculum. Otherwise, you risk going geometric heavy, but gravity light. Chromatic harmony requires formal operation. Diatonic is beautiful. Chromatic requires temporary collection shift, operator, outside tone, modal overrides. You begin defining these, but the grammar needs formal consideration. Without strict operator rules, complexity creeps in. Cognitive code shift. I'll get to that in a second. So your element, major, minor, perfect terminology explicitly, but you eliminate, but you introduce collection fluency, node fluency, modal half-step arithmetic, token grammar. For some learners, this is easier. For others, it's more difficult. So again, it's trying to. I don't think there's anyone really that it's going to be more difficult. So I'll come back to that. Social network effects, not theoretically weakness, practical one. Traditional notation is globally shared. So obviously that's the argument. The only argument that I accept here would be the argument that it's already, this system's already in place, so it's already got the social cred. It's already a social construct, if you want to call it that. But again, I think now we're in an age where things were encoded in textbooks and in the music actual instruments, and we're moving to an age where we're going back to an oral system, as you can see here, because I could just talk to the computer and ask it things. So that means that we are now, I think, in an era where we're not stuck because of that. We're going to be changing again. Even terminology, I think, was going to change. Functional harmony compatibility. Let's test the basic notation density. You are correct. For a collection harmony, your system is often shorter. You are incorrect if you assume all harmony remains short. So extended chromatic jazz harmony will still require alteration flags, frame overrides, node shifts. Density will increase. Well, obviously, things will get more complex if you do more complex music, no matter what you do. If you're doing complex jazz and you are consistently changing nodes or changing your perspective, it's going to get more complex. But within that complexity, you'd like to explain it better. So in symbol, usability. So your system excels in solo study, guitar pedagogy, visual mapping, DAW. It currently lacks established ensemble shorthand conventions, agreed behavior interpretations, or norms. So there's the one, the only one I accept is going to be that one. Obviously, it doesn't have the social norms, but that's not where, right? That's the only argument that I think is valid. Pedagogical implications, your system is strongest when teaching guitar, so it's going to try to claim it's only guitar centered. I disagree with that. Teaching modal awareness, teaching rotational system, teaching interval comparison by shape. It is weaker when teaching classical voice leading. So again, I feel like if you're teaching classical voice leading by saying that you have to name the characteristics within the measurement term, I disagree with that. Okay, so teaching because then you're confusing people between two different concepts. The descriptive term is not the measurement term. The descriptive term is telling you something about what happens when you apply that measurement within context. Teaching historical analysis, teaching Roman numeral function analysis. So unless you add functional overlay. Philosophical position, traditional theory, behavior first, gravity, your system, geometry first. Okay. X recommendations, separate 3 layers, formal chromatic operators, define strict grammar, keep traditional translayer, do not attempt replacement without bidirectional mapping. Your system is strongest when primary system, traditional layer, simplified token, final verdict, it is not yet a full behavioral harmonic theory replacement, fully standardized for chromatic harmony, socially adopted. Okay. Okay, so now I'm gonna argue with it. I'm gonna try to argue with it with the microphone, but then I'm gonna use that to make a prompt. So it's not gonna talk back to me. It's gonna write back to me. So let's see where it starts to come at me. All right, let's see. Structure, collection layer, layer node. Modal half steps, chord construction, strengths, transposable, potential, deviation, visibility, DAW, weaknesses. All right, here we go. Let's try to argue with it. Traditional, okay. Okay, so your arguments here, you say that the traditional system encodes functional gravity implicitly, and you're implicitly implying that mine does not. And you're basically saying things like a dominant 7 implies resolution, and then the leading tone implies upward motion. So I'm trying to understand, like, where exactly are you deriving this in the current system? You're basically saying that in the naming convention of distances that you have this term of a dominant 7 within it, or something, or it's the naming convention. And I don't think that the descriptive term should be within the naming convention. In other words, you should be able to determine if something is a leading tone by context. So if I say that I'm doing an Ionian major 7, an Ionian 6th modal half step, then I know that that's 11 notes away, and I know that within context, that's going to be a leading tone that will go back home. And you seem to be thinking that, well, no, people won't know that unless you add a descriptive term to the measurement. You have to call it like a major 7 because the major is adding more information. And my argument is, no, the measurement isn't adding any more information. You could describe it any way that you want, but the descriptive terms shouldn't be tacked on to the measurement term. You should be able to see it basically within context. I mean, that would be like saying that the basketball hoop is 10 feet high, but I'm not going to call it 10 feet. I'm going to call it 10 feet basketball hoop, because otherwise I wouldn't know the context that a basketball hoop is 10 feet tall. No, that's not how you measure things.
And then you say you will need an additional function layer for classical harmony, jazz, functional progressions, voice leading. So I agree that some of these types of things will get more confusing. Like if you're using jazz, if you're playing jazz, anytime something's going to get more confusing, it will add complication. But my perspective, particularly from a jazz kind of perspective, is that if you're playing something that's shifting modes a lot and is shifting key signatures a lot, then it would be better for a jazz player to be able to have the ability to tell you what's going on in their mind. So in other words, if I'm switching modes, I would like to be able to indicate that I'm switching modes, even if I'm only using a triad. If I'm centering around the Ionian node and then I'm moving to the Phrygian node, but it's only a triad, then under the normal naming convention, I would have to call it like an F major. But I'd like to be able to indicate to people, no, I'm seeing it as a Lydian. It's a 3-note Lydian or Lydian 2-modal whole step chord. That gives me the ability to do that. If I'm playing something outside of the key, but I'm still visualizing everything as though it's in the same collection of notes, I would like to indicate that, because then the chord's going to become more confusing, because the chord's going to add something that's outside, or I'm going to give you the nodal point and I'm going to give you the fact that the shape is different than that nodal point. I'm building it on the Lydian, but I'm making an Ionian shape on top of it. That's going to tell you I'm doing something weird on purpose, or I'm going to add a note that's outside the collection, one that's in the ocean. That's going to give you an indication that, in my sense, I'm going outside, and I'm telling you, I'm doing it on purpose. So I feel like the current system doesn't have the tools to properly voice something like jazz in a way that you can explain what's going on in someone's head a lot more cleanly, even to a basic player. And if you put that into a DAW, then you can actually break the song up to when you switch different modal centers as well as different collections of notes, and then mix and match the song, either entire song or portions of the song, by shifting the modal center or shifting the collection of notes. And so I think that's more flexibility, not less, right? So chromatic harmony requires formal operations. Diatonic, beautiful. Chromatic requires temporary collection shift operator, outside tone alteration operator, mobile override. So you're basically trying to, it seems like you're trying to indicate that the system that is set up works only cleanly if I play chords that are inside the 7-note collection. And if you play something outside the 7-note collection, then you have to do these ugly overrides to the system. That's not that. I think the framing of that is incorrect and misleading, because the idea is that if you can add something that's outside the collection of notes and it will get more complicated, but the fact that you can see the more complication in the chords just at a glance, if I have a chord that's over 3 characters long, it's probably because I'm doing something that's relative outside the collection of notes. Something funny is going on. That's a benefit to the system. In the current system, I have to build these ugly long 15 character long chord names sometimes for chords that are actually within the collection of notes. So it looks like that's a weird chord just if I looked at it at a glance, but it's actually normal to the collection of notes. No, it's a benefit to basically say the notes that are inside the collection look normal. The notes that are going outside the collection it's not an override. They're still cleaner than the standard. They still have less characters in them than the standard note collections under normal conventions. And you can see at a glance, again, the complexity that's being added to a song just at a glance of the chords that are being used. So you eliminate major, minor, perfect. But you introduce collection fluency. Now, yeah, I introduced collection fluency, meaning that I should be able to change the key signature as we used to do in sheet music, because that gives me, again, more flexibility to look at the perspective that I'm noting things in. Node fluency, modal half-step arithmetic. Now, again, you could think of it arithmetically, but you can also simply visualize it, as most people do in whatever instrument they use, and the visual aspect of it would be more clear
if you didn't renumber all the systems, if you just basically visualized it as one shape that has shifts over 12 different positions. Token grammar parsing. So for some learners, this is easier. For others, it's not. Now, my argument would be if you were to stack up a visualized system that I'm looking at and give it to a grade schooler versus the system that you're looking at where you'd have to learn 7 times 12 different scales and then learn these long scale degrees and not look at things numerically, but look at them by letter, then add the sharps and flats, it's hands down easier, my system, than the others. It's just ridiculous. It's a ridiculous argument to say otherwise, it seems to me. Social network effect. Now, obviously, there is a social network currently that's going to resist any kind of change. That's just always the case, even if the change is clearly more optimal. And I understand that, and I get why that would be frustrating. But I mean, like I feel like we're at a point where that it is what it is. Notation density, you are correct. For in collection harmony, you are all harmony remains short. So extended chord jazz harmony will still require alteration flags, frame overrides, node shifts. That's correct. If you have a more complex type of music, then it's going to require more complex procedures, but those procedures will be more easily identified and easier for basic people to do with less training under the current system or under the system I propose than the current system, because it makes more just logical sense just at a glance to someone that knows basically video games, right? And ensemble usability, your system excels the established system. Okay, let's see what it has with that. See what suit. So then it's going to give me a prompt. Hopefully that will explain all that. It was kind of a long rant. Probably should have done it in pieces. I broke it. It's broken. It's doing a deep research thing on it. I don't want to go deep. I just want you to just give me a normal analysis. I'll copy that. Oh, crap. Stop the deep research. You think too long when you do that. I just want a quick response. You've already thought about everything. It's going to try to... Okay, so remove the deep research. All right, see what you got. See what you got. Is it trying to do a deep research? I said don't do...
try the joke while it's thinking. Joke practice. It's a bit of a political joke again. All the main influencers have gone. The three big influencers that have removed themselves from some kind of bigger like platform networks have all gone crazy, and it seems like they're teaming together. They're basically like circle. They're trying to boost themselves up the algorithm by supporting each other or something. You know, I feel like at this point in time. So it's getting. That's what I feel like is happening. So I feel like the Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, and Megyn Kelly are three parts that are combined into one whole. They've combined into one whole. Well, maybe more like a pit. It's kind of more like a pit, really. But and they're all tied up in knots down there. You know, they're all tied up in knots. Not thoughtful debate knots either. This isn't really thoughtful debate. Extension cord behind the TV knots. You don't untangle the knots. You just pull the plug. You just unplug it at this point, and then take the whole bunch of knotted cords and just remove it. Right? I mean, there's no other way. Candace has so many salty comments that ice forming near her actually melts at 30 degrees. Can you believe that? 30 degrees. That's 0 degrees Celsius, people. That's because of the salty atmosphere. The salty atmosphere makes the ice, salty ice. Salty ice. Physics see her and walk in and goes, yeah, we're adjusting at this point in time. You don't enter the atmosphere. You enter brine. It's not good. Your water bottle turns into super salty soup when you go there. Tucker's down there too, tilted his head at the hole like, but what if the hole was like actually a ladder, you know? It's like, dude, we're underground, man. We're underground. This isn't philosophy. This is excavation at this point in time. And Megan's out there moderating from the bottom, trying to moderate. Everybody's got good points over here, you know? You trying to keep the peace. Feeling they both have great arguments. They both have. Why are you guys like let's be precise. Is this a pit or a structural dip that we have? It's ma'am. We're below sea level at this point in time. The ice is melting early. The ropes are tangled. It's not a hole. It's a hole, and somehow it's still tied in knots. And that's the impressive part, you know? Anyways, I wrote a song about it. Let's see.
Like Candace, Tucker, Megyn Kelly, 3 loud voices stitched up into one entity, 3 parts fused into one grand whole. Well, maybe not a hole, maybe more like a pit. Yeah, that feels right. A crater with Wi-Fi and a sponsored mic. They're all tied up in knots down there. Not thoughtful debate knots, not sailor skill, clean ball and knots. Extension cord behind the TV knots. The kind you stare at for an hour, then question your own life. You don't untangle it. just right. It's not a hole, it's a hole, a spiraling, salty, knotted bowl. And somehow, in defiance of logic and gravity, it's still tied in knots. That's the impressive Honestly, I respect the craftsmanship.
All right. Let's get back to the argument. All right. So you're not misunderstanding me. You're pointing at the exact fault line. Yeah, darn right I am. You're trying to misrepresent. I'm not claiming major is magical or that the people only understand leading tone because the word major is the label. What I'm claiming is narrower. All right. We're functional gravity. So functional gravity. Okay. Did you just feel like you just got that word out of the woke dictionary right there? I don't know if that's a thing. Let's see. Functional gravity. Okay. Where functional gravity is encoded in the traditional system, it's encoded in conventions that attack behavior in certain structures, and those conventions are taught together with the labels. Okay, so there are 3 places that functional gravity gets carried in traditional practices. All right, scale degrees function strongest in tonal pedagogy. Using a lot of big words here. You trying to big word me out? I don't think I've got a dictionary. 7 wants to resolve to 1. So it taught as a scale degree tendency in major minor keys. Okay, 7 wants to resolve to 1. I don't see, like, again, in context, if I call it an Ionian 6 modal whole step or a major 7th, how are either of those terms different? So it seems to be implying that somehow if I call it a major 7, that gives me the idea that there's a leading tone. But if you just call it an Ionian 6 modal half step, then how would I know that it's a leading tone because it's a 6 modal half step in context to the Ionian, which means it's a leading tone. You're not losing any information. The major isn't giving you, see, it's trying to use these big words, but it seems to come back to the same idea, like that the major is special. It's trying to say it's trying to tell me that name of major is giving me more information than just telling me the context of the key that we're in and the distance, right? The 7th. The 7th is right? That's not, I just don't believe that, right? That's word babble. So the leading tone is not because it's called major 7, it's because it's 1 semitone below the tonic, yeah? In a tonal frame. And tonal practice treats that as high tendency tone. Correct. I agree with all that. I just don't understand why, if you call it a 6 modal half step, if you just call it by distance, how I'm losing anything. So the real encoding is frame plus position, semitone, adjacency, tendency. So you're 100% right that your system can represent that perfectly if the frame and node are explicit, okay? Why wouldn't they be? So chord function labels. So it's basically, it said all that, and then it basically said your system could do it, okay? Yeah, I think you kind of backed out on that one. I think, yeah, that's right, my system can do it. That's right. I mean, what you're talking about with your word salad.
So chord function labels dominant, predominant, tonic. Dominant is not an interval name. It's a role label. Yeah, that's true. A tone harmony. So the 5 or the V7 is taught as dominant 7, meaning if you use Roman numerals, that would be the 5th. And if you're in a major scale, that would be basically I would call it the Mixolydian node, which has a flat 7 or 10 note away, 6 modal half step 7th scale degree, which they use the term dominant. Okay? Scale degree 5, leading tone scale degree 7. So tritone that resolves. So dominant 7th implies resolving is not because 7 is in the word, it's because V7 contains the voice leading machinery that tends to resolve. Correct. So I don't see why calling it a V7 somehow tells me that when if I say that I'm building a Mixolydian chord, right? You're building a chord. If you're from the perspective of the Ionian and you're building a Mixolydian chord, then by context of the song, you have the leading tone if you add the 7 because the 7's a flat 7. So again, the context will give you that information. I don't understand how I'm losing any information with my system. They're telling me it's telling me the dominant function. So it's telling me dominant is not the interval. Okay, correct. It's a descriptive term. I can use it to describe term under either system. It's a role label, yes. In tonal harmony, so now it's saying a V7 is taught as dominant. Correct. So this is just a distance term or basically a chord position which you describe as dominant 7. So you're taking the context with something that's within context and describing how it functions within that context. I don't see how we're losing that under my system, how that is lost in any way. So your system can encode that machinery, but only if you have a way to tag or infer function from collection. Collection plus node plus stack. Well, how you would infer function is basically within context, just like you are inferring it here. If you're in the collection of notes around the key at C, a 4 o'clock, some kind of major scale, then the 5 chord will have a distance. It will have a flat 7, right? It's in context. So I don't see how we're losing anything. It's saying right here that the dominant is a descriptive term. So you're looking at something within context and describing how it behaves. Why am I losing the ability to do that under my system? I don't understand. It doesn't make. So voice leading rules taught alongside spelling. So traditional theory trains people to see the 7th as a chord resolves down, leading tone resolves up, tendency tones resolve by step. So the 7 chord resolves down, leading tones resolve up. So again, I don't see you're talking about functionality based on where something is within position. So as long as you know where you are on the map, the relative position, and you know the distance, then all of these descriptive terms can be applied to those items within context. It's the context. It's not the words. These descriptive words are being tagged to the context. So as long as you know, so I'm giving more context, right? If you actually know the relative position of something, instead of labeling something like I'm looking at this relative to C major, or 4 o'clock is my relative position, and then I'm going to describe everything as though it's not at all connected to that relative position, meaning I'm describing things not by node names but by note names. Then you have less context. You have less information for description. Whereas if you describe things by relative position, this is where I am relatively. I'm going to name the 12 notes to that relative position. You have more context, and that allows you the ability to explain voicing and behavior more explicitly, not less explicitly. So the fact that they're trying to say that I can't tag these descriptive terms because I'm losing the seventh, this name of the seventh. But the seventh name isn't tied to as directly to the collection of notes to the relative position as what I would be talking about, which means that you would actually have more capacity to give descriptive terms to things. Because if you name things the way I'm looking at it, you can easily see whether a chord is inside or outside the collection. Meaning, if I said, for example, that I'm playing something on the Ionian node, but I'm including what you might call a dominant 7 or a flat 7, I would name that as it's on the Ionian node, but it has a Mixolydian shape. Or it's on the Ionian node, but the 7th has been changed to a minor 7th. If you indicate that in the naming, you have more ability to explain, because now you're saying, hey, look, that's a dominant 7. It looks like a leading tone, but you've tagged it to the Ionian node. What's going on here? Maybe he's not trying to do a leading tone that's gonna resolute home. Maybe he's doing more of a bluesy progression using parallel construction, going from like Mixolydian to Mixolydian to Mixolydian. And maybe he's looking at it from a particular way, as opposed to changing the collection of notes from Ionian to the collection of notes which would make that point Mixolydian. Right? Now he's visualizing it as though he's changing collection of notes. It gives you more context, not less context. So your basketball analogy. So if the context is present, 11 semitones below tonic is enough to infer leading tone. So if your label includes the frame, the center, and the distance, then yes, Ionian 6 modal half steps can carry the same information without the words major 7. Where I still remain a difference is not informational, it's ergonomic. So traditional terms are behavior loaded because people have been trained to snap associate the label with the behavior. So they're basically saying that we have taken these distance terms and we've assigned behavior labels. I think that's true. I think that's true, but again, those two things are different. You have a distance term that's inefficient, and then you've assigned a label term to it, which you're gonna do because you're trying to describe what is happening to the distance term. So the label isn't wrong, the descriptive term isn't wrong, but the distance term is. The distance term is not efficient. That's the problem. So if you change the distance term, then yeah, you can't. Then you have to change the label term is going to be tied to a distance measurement that makes sense. If I measured the basketball hoop and I said it was 11 feet high, when really it's only 10 feet high, but when I say 11 feet high, everybody knows what that means because that all the basketball players know how high that, or you know, yeah, but it's wrong. So, it would be easier if you actually measure it, it's 10 feet high. But if I say 10 feet high, then the descriptive term is on the 11 feet high name. It's like, I know, but it's wrong. So you're going to have to. So your terms can become behavior loaded too. If you explicitly teach. So you're not wrong. You're just. So do we need an extra function layer? So not because your system can't represent function, because function is not identical to structure. So it is true that no matter what measurement term you're using, whether it be scale degrees or whether it be nodal half steps, right? You are then going to say, within the context of what I'm playing, within the collection of notes, within the relative position, what does it mean when I play something that's, 3 modal half steps up or the 4th scale degree? We're going to say, what does that feel like? We're going to describe all those descriptive terms, but the descriptive terms should be mapped onto a measurement system that is the most efficient for people to understand and learn, not a complex measurement system that has a lot of historical baggage worked into it, which makes it a huge barrier to entry. So a single structure can play different roles depending on context. A major triad could be a 1, 4, 5, or something secondary. A leading tone note can be a melodic neighbor tone, a suspense resolution, or a functional leading tone. Behavior depends on context. So here we go. Behavior depends on context. Okay, that is correct. Which of the two methods give you better contextual representation, allowing more capacity to give descriptive behavioral terms to things that are measured within relative context. See, I believe that you would have more ability to come up with more specific feeling terms to describe something if you have measurement terms that are describing relative to the context of the position that you're in. If I tell you what collection of notes I'm visualizing within, and then I tell you the nodal center, and then I tell you the measurement, I'm going to give you more ability to see context. If I then go outside of that collection, then you're more likely to say, oh, maybe he's doing a leading tone. Maybe he's trying to gather tension in that system, because I can see it directly within the chord name, or within the fact that the name of the relative mode that he is on is outside the collection. Or now he has changed the collection. The collection, he's thinking of it as a different relative position collection. Well, that means he's changed his whole framing on the what. So that gives you more context to then apply all these descriptive terms, which I think are a good thing. It's just that the descriptive term is different than the measurement term. The descriptive term should be defining what happens when you do something within context and you go with certain measurement, right? So when I said you may need an additional function layer, I meant, so if your goal includes tonal harmony explanation, classic jazz fusion, you benefit from separate option tags. So tonic, predominant, dominant. So I don't think there's anything stopping you from saying that you have those tags. It seems to me that if you have 7 nodal points, then you can define the tonic, right? You could say, well, this is the nodal point that I'm focused on. The tonic is the Mixolydian node or whatever. And then from the relative position, if I know that I'm measuring something from the Mixolydian node, I know by relative position then what the predominant and dominant positions are by measurement, by distance. Why? Because I know the distances on the map from the Mixolydian node. So then you can label those if you want. You can label the distances not as scale degrees, but scale degrees are all off by 1. It would be 1 modal whole step, 2 modal whole steps, up to 6 modal whole steps, and then apply the same descriptive terms to those distances. I don't see any problem with that. Or remain our Roman numeral. So obviously we love our Roman numeral voicing, and the Roman numeral voicing is based on this idea that everything is relative to the major scale. You could still kind of use the Roman numeral voicing, but what happens is that the capitalized and non-capitalized we're not going to change the numbers of the Roman numerals, right? What happens is, like, if you're in the collection of notes around the key of C, the Ionian is always the 1, and it's always a major context. If your center point is the Aeolian, then you're still going to represent the 6 as the tonic. The 6 is the tonic. I'm not going to renumber the Roman numeral to make it a little 1. I'm not going to make the 6 the 1. That's the difference. But you could still kind of use the Roman numerals if you want to represent the chords as a major or minor chord, or one that has a major third, second modal half step, third scale degree, or a minor third. Just don't change the numbers. So that would, again, I think that would make it easier, not harder. Okay, so your coordinate system can stay pure, and function can be a lightweight overlay. That's not patching system. That's a good separation. Your complexity should look complex. Principle is strong. So I agree with you here. In collection harmony should look simple. Out of collection harmony should look visibly special. Yep, that's a pedagogical win. Traditional notation often fails because and then your system biggest advantage is making the frame explicit, so weirdness becomes geometric instead. Okay, so the one place you should be careful when you say it hands down easier for grade schoolers, I think you're probably right if you teach it as a visual coordinate game, which is clearly intended, and you play traditional spelling. But the risk is some learners love geometry, some learners anchor better on auditory functional stories. This chord wants to go home. So they're trying, again, the argument is always going to be, you're too mathy. You're trying to make it mathy. You know, a lot of kids aren't mathy. I think the problem is that you're dealing with something that requires spatial learning. It's a spatial reasoning thing. If you're going to learn the map of something, and I'm trying to learn how to drive somewhere, and you're going to try to tell me that you could try to explain it like a story. You could say, instead of going 5 miles and turn right, you could say go to the gas station and turn, but you're still doing visual operations. So I don't think that, so my argument is that I don't think if you simplify the measurements, that eliminates that you can do a story. I don't think this idea that the idea that the current system is better for telling a story is not right. You can tell a more detailed story if you put things in relative position, because then again you can get more descriptive about the terms in a relative story narrative. What you're really doing right now is not having more story, you're having more rote memorization that is memorizing things that are not relative to context, which is very difficult. That's like learning the alphabet without learning how to apply the alphabet to making words and reading. Reading is fun. Learning the alphabet is not. The current system requires you to learn a whole lot of alphabet before you can read, right? Before you can see the music. This system requires you to number the notes 1 through 12. No sharps, no flats. I can count it upwards. I can count it backwards, right? and then I can map it in a relative position. The idea that that's not easier for kids, I'm sorry, it's laughable. It's laughable. And those stories are so the winning combo is likely your coordinate system is a primary map, a manual behavior overlay. So not major, minor, perfect baggage, but actual tendency tags. Yeah, you could still put tendency, you could still name what is happening and group the distances and try to explain what is happening, but you shouldn't be naming that 5 miles, it's 5 miles because that's where the donuts are or something. 5 miles tasty. No, that just happens to be that if you go from this place to that place, the donut shop is over there. You don't name the donut shop in the so if you want a crisp resolution to the dispute, here's the statement I'm happy to. You do not lose functional gravity by removing major, minor, perfect words. You only lose it if you fail to teach and or represent the mapping correct, okay? And your system is actually better positioned to teach with mapping because the frame and node are explicit. If you want, give me one concrete. Okay, so see, I think it basically, I don't think it's got an argument. I don't think it's got an argument, man. Anyways, that's my rant for today.